Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about a big one, the new album from Oneohtrix Point Never, Age of... Age of what? I don't know. Danny Lopatin, I'm sure this man does not require any introduction at this point. Experimental artist who I and most others I see consider one of the most creative and forward-thinking artists in electronic music right now. Guy is one of my personal favorite albums of all time with R+7 right here. Now, this is obviously not the first time I've covered him on this channel. Last year I did a review of his soundtrack to the film Good Time. I'll link that video in the description if you want a more detailed introduction to his music, but in the meantime I'll quickly recap my thoughts on his discography so far. It's 5 different albums in one, mostly more minimalistic, synth-driven ambient stuff, all pretty solid. Covered each of the 5 discs individually in the last and brief segment I did, but I don't want to keep you for too long. Bit more of a progression from the Rift stuff, certainly better than any of those 5 individually. This is some more sample-based stuff that's very creative and an essential listen. Easily my favorite Oneohtrix album. Okay, I'll admit I rarely return to this one, but I still enjoy it a lot anytime I actually do revisit it, so yeah, I still can't deny there's no album out there that sounds like it. I'm starting to discover a lot of people really didn't like this one, for whatever reason, but I am not one of them. One of the better film soundtracks I've heard from an electronic artist. Which brings us to here. So yeah, going into this latest album, I can't say I knew what to expect. I didn't hear the teaser single, Black Snow, when that dropped. I do know the guy had some live show called My Riad accompanying this, and I'd heard some people call this album poppier than his previous stuff. But Danny Lopatin and pop are not two concepts that I would typically associate with one another. Also, this album apparently had production help among other things from James Blake of all people. I didn't know what that was going to be like either. However, I know that Lopatin has always done a good job at staying ahead of the curve and keeping his sound fresh, so I knew whatever was going to come next was going to be interesting. I don't have any more prelude than that, so what did we get with Age of? I don't even know where to begin with this album. I will say that Lopatin has succeeded in staying ahead of the curve and being as creative and out of the box as usual, though. There is an absolute crap ton to unpack here, and nearly all of it sounds like anything else I've heard before, but it's also a really big mixed bag. R+7 and Garden of Delete, for all the weirdness contained within those albums, still had a pretty unique and focused vision and sound. Age of went in like 5 different directions, and I have no idea what Lopatin was really going for on this one as far as coming together as a whole. That said, I don't think there were any truly bad tracks on here, or moves that Lopatin made that I outright disapprove of. The album is so fascinating and strange, I still think it's really good and absolutely worth people's time. I'm sure I'm heavily in the minority of people that didn't find it incredible, but we will see. So yeah, talking about individual tracks, there is so much to say. I guess I'll have to start with the pop elements mentioned above. Now again, I didn't hear Black Snow prior to the album's release, so this probably didn't come as much of a surprise to most people following the release, but Lopatin sings on this album. A lot. 4 entire tracks on here feature Lopatin's own voice, those being Babylon, The Station, Black Snow, and Still Stuff That Doesn't Happen. And on top of that, he even gets some vocal help from Anonhi and Prurient on various moments. Sorry for butchered pronunciations as per usual. Now, it's not like there's no precedent for this at all. Lopatin sang in this way on the closer of Garden of Delete, No Good, and it sounded just like he does here. But, how to put this? He's not a good singer. He's not awful, he's not painful to listen to or anything, but he's not very charismatic or interesting. He requires lots of effects, like auto-tune and the like, and he doesn't have much of an emotional presence. When it was just on the one song from Garden of Delete, sure, that wasn't one of my big favorites from that album, but it didn't stick out to me as much of a problem, more of a novelty than anything. But here, when the singing is such a prevalent focal point to the album, I can't say I'm all that impressed. On Babylon, he just does, like, plain auto-tune crooning over a kind of pretty-sounding ballad. And Black Snow is kind of similar, but catchier and a bit more abstract. Ooh, ever Black Snow. These are pretty okay tracks that I wouldn't say are skippable, but don't leave a strong impression on me. I imagine James Blake was probably an influence on tracks like these, although Blake is obviously a far better singer. The only moment where I felt kind of annoyed by Lopatin's voice, though, was the station. The effects he uses here were a bit harsher and just, you know, not very fun to listen to. Though this track also does have some other interesting instrumental elements in it to make up for that. But you compare it to the one vocal track on here where I don't think he actually sings at all, but instead leaves it up to Oneohtrix and Prurient, the track Same. And that one was easily my favorite of the vocal tracks. Not only is it pretty catchy, but the vocals pop out a lot more and they sound like they're really living it up. Undo us, same! And as for Still Stuff That Doesn't Happen, that almost doesn't really feel like a vocal track at all. I mean, sure, there are vocals, but they're more used for, like, background textures than anything. It is not a pop track at all, so yeah. So as for the rest of the album, I feel like with the packaging and imagery used to promote the album, he was going for some kind of old-timey Baroque-inspired take on his sound. And the title track here really makes it sound like that's what we're about to get. Is this primarily harpsichord-driven track, super gothic sounding and intense, and really got me hyped up to hear the rest of this album. The little opera-esque voice samples placed in some points really helps complement that atmosphere, but after that's really the only time we get that sound back in a visceral way is Myriad.Industries, kind of inconsequential interlude that, you know, plays the harpsichords a little more. And then we just never really hear that sound come back again. I mean, sure, some harpsichord-like sounds do return in various other spots on the album. Sometimes it goes for the Baroque-like sound a little bit, especially on some of the vocal tracks like Babylon and The Station. But in those cases, the modernized vocal effects really undermine that, and it never sounds like he's going for that kind of sound at any point afterwards, leading to this feeling like he'd given up on the idea he'd started out with halfway through the album. By the second half, we've made it to tracks like Warning and We'll Take It, which moves us into some really dark, twisted, and noisy territory that's closer to the Garden of Delete sound. Now, I do still end up enjoying these tracks, alright? A bit intense for me sometimes, especially the latter, which just, I don't know, doesn't have enough melody for me. And the one moment on Warning, where I think it's Prurient, he just screams the title, and it's really distorted, and it's like a jump scare. Like, Warning! Though after that, it does get pretty catchy after that and satisfying, all things considered. Everything else on here sounds like it's kind of going for something in between the sound he has on R+7 and Garden of Delete, and his experimentalism and weirdness is still easily the highlight on here. Just whenever he has straight instrumental tracks like Manifold, you know, a quick little interlude with some enjoyably spirit-lifting synth work and sample manipulation, or Toys 2, which just floats all over the place and does whatever it likes, or RayCats, which seems to involve some, like, Asian-influenced textures, which I quite enjoyed. All his uses of the guitars and harpsichord and whatever applicable similar-sounding instrumentation often gives me some kind of, like, Drux vibes that I think mesh pretty well with his usual style. The last two tracks on the album, by the way, were definitely my two favorites. I already mentioned Still Stuff That Doesn't Happen, but I did not mention that it brings in, like, these jazzy elements that I did not see coming, especially this late into the album. It's, like, has these more acoustic-sounding drums, and I think there was a little part that sounded like some kind of modulated saxophone. Along with all the vocals placed in random spots more as texture than as the focal point, as mentioned previously. This is just a really warm and textured track. It's really enjoyable. And the ending, Last Known Image of a Song, takes us into some more down-tempo and experimental territory, keeping an upright bass around for some jazzy texture and weird, jangly, otherworldly percussion textures that give me some, like, vague Andreas Vollenweider vibes, with some flute-like sounds as well. There were some flute-like sounds in other tracks too, though. Yeah, quite possibly the best track there, right at the end. But, yeah, that's a lot of different stuff I have to say on the 13 tracks on this album. It just goes all over the place with me, and it never at any point felt like these tracks coalesced into anything particularly cohesive. One moment he's sounding all Baroque and Gothic, and another he's doing like a straight auto-tune ballad. Another he's doing experimental synth work, another he's doing harsh, edgy, and noisy stuff, and by the end he started bringing in jazz elements, because why not? It's so completely scattershot and jumbled that I have a hard time calling this the best work he can do. But I've made it clear in the past, for one thing, I would rather albums have more variety and be interesting over albums that are more one note and do the same stuff over and over, and I would rather artists try new things and push themselves over developing a comfort zone and sticking to an established formula. And I'm glad Lopatin has pushed himself more and been more interesting. For all my gripes with Age of and my feeling it's inconsistency, I do think that Lopatin has pulled off one very unique and enjoyable album that even in the weaker moments I still think are pretty enjoyable for what they are. Is it a year-end list contender? I don't think so, but it's such a weird album that's unlike anything I've heard before, so I don't know, it'll probably get an honorable mention at least. Certainly not my favorite Oneohtrix Point Never album overall, but it's still a Oneohtrix Point Never album, and he is able to deliver his particular brand of weirdness that I've always enjoyed with a few more surprises. So, I'm overall feeling 7.5 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.